Hi everyone, welcome to UCLA Interaxon. My name is Angel and I'm here with my peer Lupita and we're super excited to teach you about neuromarketing today. Okay, so what is neuromarketing? Neuromarketing focuses on how consumers make choices, and this is also known as consumer neuroscience. So let's dive into the details. Neuromarketing observes and interprets human emotion and behavior and uses this information in the designing of new products and advertisements. So there are two imaging techniques we'd like to go over with you. The first one is fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, and this measures blood flow. And the second is EEG, or electroencephalography, which measures electrical activity. And believe it or not, 90% of all the information our brain processes is done subconsciously, which means we're not even completely aware that our brain is thinking through all these things. So as consumers, our willingness to buy a product or service is an emotional process. So to demonstrate how emotional our willingness to buy is, I'd like you to think about two questions. The first question is, would you buy something for someone you don't like? Take a few seconds to think about it. Probably not, because you don't like that person. The second question is, would you buy something from a close friend? Take a few seconds to think about it, and you'll realize that you probably would because you like your friend. So after thinking through these two questions, we can see how emotion drives what we purchase. And brands use this neuroscience concept to build a relationship with consumers through our emotions. So for example, let's say you're in a grocery store and you're debating between two types of cheese, but you remember really liking a commercial that one brand broadcasted on TV, and that commercial made you feel happy, so that makes you choose one cheese brand over the other cheese brand. Okay, now we're going to talk about some market research. So there are different strategies that advertising uses to get inside our heads. What are some techniques you would use to sell a product? In the next few slides, we'll be going over a few together. So firstly, in product design and packaging, the way that a product looks, feels, and functions affects a person's experience and their interaction with the product. So when comparing a human to human relationship with a human to brand relationship, we find that the same areas are triggered for positive relationships as when we encounter well-liked brands. So this really goes to show how much brands can affect our brains. So if we compare a generic brand food name versus a name brand food, we find that they trigger different parts of the brain. So the well-known brand name triggers the pallidum. So if you touch right next to your ear, that's where your pallidum is located. The well-known brand name also triggers the posterior cingulate, which spans most of your brain. And it also triggers the frontal cortex. So if you touch right near your forehead, that's where frontal cortex is. And these brain regions are associated with positive emotions and rewards. In comparison, the unknown generic brand name triggers the insular cortex, which is really deep inside your brain, and that is associated with negative emotions. Okay, now we're going to do a fun experiment. So I want you to think about if you would rather drink Pepsi or Coke. And across the United States, most people prefer Coke over Pepsi. However, in a blind taste test experiment, researchers found that most people preferred Pepsi. However, once participants were told which cup contained Coke, over half of the participants switched their preference. And researchers also placed participants in an MRI scanner just to see what different parts of the brain were activated. And Pepsi activated the prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of higher thinking, and Coke activated the hippocampus, which is responsible for explicit memory formation. So just as a little reflection, I want you to think about if you've ever made a selection between two options and then switched your preference after realizing the other one was more popular, which is exactly what happened in this Pepsi Cola experiment. Okay, and our next activity is about cereal. So, as just an intro question, I want you to think about your favorite cereal. And you also might find that it's super nice when you go to the grocery store and you don't have to reach super high or jump up to get that favorite cereal. However, this is actually a neuromarketing technique that companies use. And sugary cereals that are popular with children are placed on the lower shelves, while cereals that adults tend to enjoy are placed on the higher shelves. And sugary cereals also have more colorful packaging to attract your eyes when you're browsing through the grocery store and you see your favorite cereal on a lower shelf. For example, in the photos, you'll see that cereals that are more attractive to adults, such as Fiber One and Total, are located higher, whereas the colorful, more sugary cereals, such as Oreos and Fruit Loops, are located lower. And just want to make sure that you guys are conscious of this when you're making those purchases. And now I'm going to pass it on to my peer, Lupita.
Hi everyone, my name is Lupita and I'll be going through the next couple of slides with market research, specifically pricing. So we don't tend to round or calculate value properly. So when we sound out prices in our head, we tend to follow two general patterns. The first one being the more syllables pronounced, the higher the perceived value. And the second one is we tend to disregard the cost added from cents. So $29.99 just seems like it's only $29. So the act of rounding also seems to have an emotional component. A purchase made using a rounded cost is often driven by emotion, while a non-rounded price is driven instead by logical decision-making using our cognition. An example of this is how luxury products, consumers will typically round the cost to help justify its purchase. So in regards to advertising, some of the key questions that big brands and companies ask themselves are, how can a product be made more appealing to audiences? And something that comes to mind is how the product appears. So the packaging, the colors, images, and fonts, and things of that sort. The second question is, what would you do to get people to remember your brand? And if you're like me, I remember brands that have a very unique or catchy name. And this third question, making sure people hear about your product is important, right? We know through advances in technology that a lot of big companies have been using social media platforms in order to promote their products. And lastly, is it possible though to overexpose people? And you can think of overexposure as an extreme form of advertising where people are viewing the same products over and over again. And market researchers have actually told us to be cautious of product overexposure because your brain ends up naturally deciding that that product must be abundant and therefore not valuable. So by associating overexposure with overabundance, your brain therefore makes the product less appealing and reduces the likelihood of its purchase. And this makes sense, right? Because if we know that something's going to be available and almost guaranteed the next day, we're much less likely to make an impulsive purchase of buying it at that moment. And a prime example of this is McDonald's. We know so well those yellow colored M's or golden arches. And it turns out that it actually reduces their consumer population because we find them everywhere on the freeways, during lunchtime, and even during commercials. So in this next activity, let's go grocery shopping. So imagine you're shopping at the grocery store. Which items would you buy? How do your purchases support what you've learned in this lesson? So think about the strategies we've learned about in these last couple of slides, and I'll give you a couple of seconds to look at these yummy snacks. So which ones did you guys like? You may find that you gravitated towards items you may have had a positive association with, like your favorite childhood cookies, like the farmhouse cookies on the far left, or items with more aesthetic packaging, like the Terra chips on the far right. And with that, I want to conclude with knowing how neuroscience is at the heart of numerous product designs, and advertising companies are making bets on exactly how people will react to their different marketing strategies. I really want to encourage you to take on this next tip to challenge yourself to be as objective as possible when making a purchase. So really take into consideration the price tag and analyze the product worth. And with that, thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned a thing or two about neuromarketing.